quite a lengthy time. We absolutely couldn't beat that son of a. No matter what we tried, he would just...
Could one mechanic single-handedly rewrite an entire sports rule book? Henry "Smokey" Yunick did exactly that, and NASCAR has never been the same. Working out of a legendary garage in Daytona Beach, Florida, this Ukrainian-American son of a Pennsylvania farmer became the most feared, celebrated, and controversial mind-stock car racing had ever produced. Officials hated him. Rivals feared him. Fans adored him. And the NASCAR rulebook grew thicker with every car he touched. This is the story of the man who fooled an entire sport, not once or twice, but for decades on end. The farm boy who flew into history. When people talk about genius, they rarely picture a teenager running a Pennsylvania farm after his father died. But that is where the Smokey Yunick story begins, in the rural flatlands of Neshaminy, Pennsylvania, where a young Henry Yunick dropped out of school at 16 to keep his family's operation alive. No college degree, no engineering credentials, just raw intelligence and an obsession with anything mechanical. Born on May 25, 1923, Yunick grew up in a Ukrainian immigrant household and taught himself everything he needed to know by taking things apart and putting them back together better than before. His nickname came from motorcycles. In his spare time, away from farm chores, he raced bikes across local tracks. One of those machines had a nasty habit of belching thick engine smoke, and a fellow competitor who kept forgetting Henry's name simply started calling him Smokey. The name stuck, and it would become one of the most recognized in American motorsport history. When World War II arrived, Yunick joined the United States Army Air Corps and became a B-17 Flying Fortress bomber pilot. He flew more than 50 combat missions over Europe with the 97th Bombardment Group of the 15th Air Force, based at Amendola Airfield in Italy. He even named his aircraft Smokey and his firemen, a personal touch that revealed the kind of personality already forming behind the flight goggles. After serving in the European theater, he was transferred to the Pacific following VE Day. It was during those wartime flights over the southeastern United States that Yunick spotted Daytona Beach from the air and decided that was where he wanted to live. In 1946, after marrying, he moved to Florida, and 2 years later opened what would become one of the most famous garages in American history. He called it Smokey's Best Damn Garage in Town, situated on Beach Street in Daytona Beach. He started out repairing trucks, but local stock car drivers quickly found their way to his door. They had heard that the man inside understood engines the way surgeons understand the human body. His reputation spread fast. Herb Thomas, one of the sport's earliest stars, began working with Yunick and won the NASCAR Winston Cup Championship in both 1951 and 1953, under Yunick's mechanical direction. Then came Fireball Roberts, the hard-charging driver from Daytona, who would become one of racing's most electrifying personalities. With Yunick turning wrenches, Roberts put his Pontiac on the pole at Daytona 3 consecutive years, from 1960 through 1962. Yunick also became the first team owner to win back-to-back Daytona 500s, doing so in 1961 and 1962, making Pontiac the first manufacturer to accomplish that feat. In a sport still defining itself, Yunick was already operating on a different level. His relationship with the major automakers reflected just how serious his contributions were. He became Chevrolet's unofficial factory race team, while simultaneously leading NASCAR efforts for both Ford and Pontiac at different periods. Much of the high-performance development of the legendary Chevrolet small-block V8 engine ran through Yunick's hands. He did not just prepare cars, he helped shape the machinery that defined an era of American motorsport. The garage itself became a Daytona institution. For 4 decades, from 1947 until he closed the doors in 1987, Yunick ran his shop with the same principles he applied to racing: Do not waste time. Do not accept conventional thinking. Do not let anyone tell you something cannot be done. He once explained closing the garage by saying simply that there were no more good mechanics left to work with. That statement, blunt and unapologetic, captured everything about how Yunick approached life and engineering. But the real fireworks, the ones that would permanently alter how NASCAR policed its own sport, were just getting started. And the tricks he had in store were unlike anything officials had ever encountered. The loopholes that rewrote the rulebook. NASCAR's early years operated with what could generously be described as a relaxed approach to regulation. The rulebook was thin, assumptions were plentiful, and determined minds could find enormous gaps between what was written and what was intended. Nobody found those gaps faster, more creatively, or with greater results than Smokey Yunick. He never saw himself as a cheater. He saw the rulebook as a document full of things that were not explicitly forbidden, and he treated every unanswered question as an open invitation. One of his earliest exploits involved frozen fuel. The rules at the time specified a maximum size for a car's fuel tank, measured by volume. Yunick recognized a simple thermodynamic truth that NASCAR officials had never considered. Colder liquids are denser. By cooling his fuel to near freezing temperatures before inspection, the liquid contracted and took up less space, meaning the tank could be filled with more combustible material per measured gallon. Once the race began and temperatures rose, that fuel expanded, delivering more energy than a room temperature fill would have provided. By the time NASCAR figured out what was happening, a new rule about fuel temperature had to be written specifically to close the gap. Then came the basketball. Yunick identified another path around the fuel capacity limit, this one almost absurdly clever. During technical inspection, officials would fill a car's tank to verify its legal capacity. Yunick placed an inflated basketball inside an oversized tank before inspection. The ball took up space, so the tank appeared to hold only its legal limit when filled. After inspection, his crew would deflate the ball, and suddenly, the tank had significantly more capacity available for race day. The trick worked until inspectors figured out what was going on, and another rule had to be written. The fuel line story is perhaps the most famous of all his exploits. NASCAR officials had defined the maximum size of the fuel tank, but had not addressed the size or length of fuel lines. Yunick, always looking for exactly such a gap, coiled 11 feet of 2-inch diameter tubing underneath one of his cars. That extra length of line held over 2 additional gallons of fuel. When officials removed his fuel tank during one inspection and found 9 rule violations on the car, the story goes that Yunick looked at the list, declared there were actually 11 problems, climbed into the car, and drove it back to his shop, sans fuel tank, on the fuel still sitting in those hidden coils. Whether every detail of that legend is perfectly accurate, the underlying reality is not disputed. The extra tubing was real. The extra fuel was real. And yet another new NASCAR rule followed shortly after. Among the most technically sophisticated of his moves was what became known as the 7/8 scale car story, involving his number 13 1966 Chevrolet Chevelle, which he raced under the 1967 banner. The car was built for Curtis Turner and took pole position at the 1967 Daytona 500, stunning the NASCAR community. Competitors were certain that something illegal was happening. The car was dramatically faster than anything else on the track during qualifying, reaching speeds around 180 miles per hour that factory-backed teams could not match. Yet, the profile looked stock. Inspectors could not find the problem. What Yunick had actually done was a masterclass in aerodynamic engineering rather than simple rule bending. He had lowered the roofline, raised the floor, repositioned the bumpers close to the fenders, flattened the underbody to create a smooth belly pan. and reduced aerodynamic drag across the car's entire profile. The cumulative effect produced a machine that looked like a factory Chevelle, but behaved like a purpose-built racing prototype. After that car's story became legendary, NASCAR responded by requiring that every race car's roof, hood, and trunk match templates built to represent the production car's exact profile. Those templates became a permanent fixture of NASCAR technical inspection. He also reportedly ran supercharged engines during portions of the late 1950s without detection, a story he shared late in life. The only reason the secret stayed intact was that Yunick kept it from his own crew members, doing the supercharger work himself after everyone else went home in the early hours of the morning. He stopped the program not because he was caught, but because the workload was physically destroying him. Each exploit prompted another rule. Former Charlotte Motor Speedway president Humpy Wheeler once described the pattern precisely, noting that Yunick's cars were going through corners so much faster than everyone else that rivals assumed handling problems rather than straight-line speed advantages. The reality was that his engineering simply operated on a different level. The depth of his impact on the sport's regulations is almost impossible to overstate. But even more astonishing is what he was doing away from the track entirely, and the technology he quietly developed that the world still has not fully reckoned with. The genius beyond the garage. Most people who know the Smokey Yunick story know the cheating legends. Fewer know that alongside his NASCAR career, Yunick was filing patents, writing columns, and conducting engineering experiments that placed him decades ahead of mainstream automotive thinking. A man without a formal education past 10th grade was producing ideas that college-trained engineers struggled to fully comprehend or replicate. His column for Popular Science magazine, which ran through the 1960s and 1970s, gave him a platform to respond to reader questions about mechanical problems and automotive performance. He also wrote regularly for Circle Track magazine. These were not ghost-written celebrity endorsements. Yunick wrote from knowledge, explaining the physics behind engine behavior, vehicle dynamics, and mechanical engineering with a directness that made complex ideas accessible to ordinary readers. His communication ran alongside his invention, not separate from it. The list of innovations Yunick patented reads like a product catalog for the modern automotive industry. Variable ratio power steering, the extended tip spark plug, reverse flow cooling systems, a high-efficiency vapor carburetor, and a trackside safety barrier made from discarded tires, all originated with him. NASCAR's own founder, Bill France Sr., rejected the tire barrier idea. Ironically, safety walls using rubber and similar impact-absorbing materials would eventually become standard at racing venues worldwide. Yunick held at least 9 patents, with some accounts placing the number as high as 12. The most extraordinary project of his later career was the hot vapor engine. After leaving NASCAR in 1970 following repeated clashes with Bill France Sr. over creative and political differences, Yunick turned his full attention to a problem that was consuming the American automotive conversation: fuel efficiency. The 1970s oil crisis had created enormous pressure on automakers to find solutions, and Yunick believed he had one. His theory centered on vaporizing gasoline before combustion rather than delivering it as a liquid. By heating fuel through contact with exhaust gases and pushing the mixture through a homogenizer to blend oxygen and vapor uniformly, Yunick believed he could extract dramatically more energy from the same quantity of fuel. The system he developed was not simple, and he never fully disclosed every detail of its operation. His daughter, Trush Yunick, told Hot Rod magazine after his death that some of the engine's secrets went with him. What he demonstrated publicly was remarkable. In 1987, Yunick installed his hot vapor system into a standard Pontiac Fiero with a 4-cylinder Iron Duke engine that made roughly 90 horsepower and 125 pound-feet of torque in stock form. With his modifications, the same engine produced 250 horsepower, 230 foot-pounds of torque, delivered fuel economy above 50 miles per gallon, and could accelerate from 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 6 seconds. Those numbers, read together, seem physically impossible from a stock four-cylinder. Yet observers from multiple automotive companies witnessed the results firsthand. Major manufacturers including Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, BMW, Volvo, and Volkswagen all expressed serious interest after test drives. DeLorean Motor Company made a direct acquisition offer of $20 million backed by Texas oil money connected to H.L. Hunt. That deal collapsed when John DeLorean was arrested on separate federal charges the following week. The timing was devastating. A genuine breakthrough in fuel efficiency lost its biggest commercial window at the worst possible moment. Mainstream automakers ultimately declined to pursue the technology further, and the hot vapor engine faded from public awareness. The surviving examples of vehicles fitted with Yunick's hot vapor system have become collector items. The Pontiac Fiero he modified is currently housed at the Don Garlits Drag Racing and Car Museum in Ocala, Florida, where visitors can see it in person. His daughter retains one of the other modified vehicles, a Volkswagen fitted with his system. The technology remains undeployed at commercial scale, a chapter of automotive history that never fully reached its potential. Away from the track and away from his experimental work, Yunick also involved himself in gold mining operations in Ecuador, petroleum industry development, and experiments with alternative energy, including hydrogen, natural gas, solar panels, and windmills. For a man dismissed in popular imagination as a racing mechanic who bent rules, the breadth of his intellectual activity is genuinely staggering. Understanding how that same mind eventually came into permanent conflict with the organization he helped build reveals the complicated final chapter of a relationship between a sport and the man who arguably shaped it more than anyone else. The falling out and the lasting legacy. By 1970, the tension between Smokey Yunick and NASCAR's founding France family had grown beyond repair. Bill France Sr., who had built NASCAR from the ground up and ran it with absolute authority, and Yunick had clashed repeatedly over creative decisions, safety innovations France refused to implement, and the fundamental question of who had the right to determine how the sport evolved. Yunick felt his ideas were consistently ignored or dismissed. He had championed trackside safety improvements, including his tire barrier design that would have reduced the severity of wall impacts, only to watch France reject it outright. After one too many overrulings on matters Yunick considered non-negotiable, he walked away from NASCAR entirely. His departure did not erase the footprint he left behind. NASCAR historians credit Yunick with personally forcing the creation of a significant portion of the technical inspection standards that govern the sport today. Every template used to verify a car's profile, every regulation addressing fuel temperature, fuel line dimensions, and tank design carries the fingerprints of Yunick's exploits. He did not just race within the rules. He forced the rules to become what they are. The sport inducted Yunick into its Hall of Fame, recognizing that his contribution went far beyond winning races. His teams won 57 NASCAR Cup Series races across his career. He was named NASCAR Mechanic of the Year twice. Drivers including Herb Thomas, Fireball Roberts, Curtis Turner, and Marvin Panch all benefited from his engineering before climbing into race cars. Panch, who drove for Yunick and won the 1961 Daytona 500, described him as simply the best there ever was on engines. That summary came from someone who had experienced his work firsthand at the highest levels of competition. The tragedy of Fireball Roberts' 1964 crash at Charlotte Motor Speedway hit Yunick deeply. Roberts suffered severe burns when his car caught fire during a crash, and he spent 40 days in agony before dying from his injuries. That loss sharpened Yunick's already serious commitment to driver safety and reinforced his frustration with NASCAR's reluctance to implement protection measures. His advocacy for better safety systems continued long after Roberts was gone. Yunick spent his final years writing his autobiography titled Best Damn Garage in Town, which he described publicly as raw and unedited, exactly the way he lived his life. He supervised every aspect of the publishing process himself, refusing to soften or revise anything. He died on May 9, 2001, from leukemia, at age 77 in Daytona Beach, the city he had chosen from the cockpit of a wartime bomber 5 decades earlier. The book launched on schedule during race week in Daytona that summer, as he had planned. The NASCAR Hall of Fame in Charlotte, North Carolina, holds his legacy formally. The International Motorsports Hall of Fame inducted him in 1990, but the real monument to Yunick lives inside the technical inspection tent at every NASCAR event, inside the thick rulebook that officials carry, and inside every innovation that modern racing teams attempt, while inspectors measure templates against bodywork, check fuel lines, and verify every cubic centimeter of a car's fuel system. Every one of those checks exists because Smokey Yunick found a way around the previous version. A sport that began with a thin set of handwritten rules now operates with one of the most comprehensive technical inspection systems in all of motorsport, complete with radio frequency identification chips embedded in chassis components. 50 uniformed inspectors working simultaneously, and inspection processes that can take up to 10 hours for a single car. That transformation did not happen because officials woke up one day and decided to get thorough. It happened because Henry Yunick spent 2 decades demonstrating exactly what a brilliant, determined, and completely unintimidated mind could do when the rulebook left room for interpretation. The story of Smokey Yunick is not a story of reconciliation or redemption. It is a story of one immensely talented individual who created something extraordinary, pushed it apart through brilliance and conflict, and spent decades watching the organization he helped shape try to make sense of what he had done. At 77, Yunick finally put everything on paper, acknowledging both the genius of his innovations and the inevitability of his departure. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more stories like this one. Drop a comment below and let us know what you think about Smokey Yunick and his incredible legacy. We will see you in the next one.